Welcome back, my little horrorlings. Are you ready for some more scary stories to give you nightmares? Well, gather round, 'cause Mama's got some good ones for you today. I went on a little hiking trip with my dad to Shasta, California, a small town in Northern California near the Oregon border. Shasta is home to a potentially active volcano named, of course, Mount Shasta. There are many trails on Mount Shasta, so my father and I were excited to do some hiking. We drove up the side of the mountain to the parking lot in which one of the trails began. I believe it was called the Old Ski Bowl Trail. The landscape was a very barren incline filled with rocks, boulders, dirt, and very few trees. About an hour into the trail we came across a very odd assembly of these large boulders. They were arranged in a circle. We thought it was strange, but we continued on. If you look up pictures of the trail, you'll see much smaller rocks arranged in patterns and circles. My father and I only encountered 3 people. At least, that's what they appeared to be at first. The first 2 were a father and son. We met them on a steep incline that went along the wall of a cliff that would then switch back as it reached the top of the cliff. We stopped and said hello, talked about the trail, and then went our separate ways. Here's where it gets weird. Dad and I kept walking up the incline for about 2 more minutes. I turned around and I saw the father and son so far down the trail. It should have taken them at least 20 minutes to get down to where they were, but somehow they were there in only about 2 minutes. To this day, I have absolutely no idea how that could have happened. There was no one else on the trail at that point, and I could see the colour of their clothes from that distance, so I knew it was them. I pointed it out to my dad, and we thought it was weird, but we didn't dwell on it, and we kept going. And here is where it gets so much weirder. As we reached the top of the cliff, there was another strange rock arrangement that was off to the side of the trail. This time there were far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows, almost like gravestones. We continued on the trail and reached another sort of incline with a switchback to reach the top of another cliff. We reached a point where we would need climbing gear to continue, so we decided to head back. When we turned around, I saw a man standing among the rocks, staring at us. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features, but it was almost as if he had none. Like his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed him out to my dad, and the man quickly ducked down behind a boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It seemed almost playful, like a child trying to hide. For a few moments I was out of it, and I have no recollection of what was going on. According to my dad, I just started walking towards the man in the hat. My dad was calling to me, "Joshua, Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And then I came to. I was standing right at the edge of the cliff. It was a huge drop, enough to kill me or seriously injure me. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back to the trail. He told me to stay put, and he went down to the boulders to search for the man. But he wasn't there. There was nowhere for him to go except up or down the trail. It didn't make any sense. He just disappeared. I have no idea what was going on that trail, and I have no explanation for it. I've told this story many times to family and friends, and no one has an explanation. I've done research and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. I've also read that the Native American tribes from the area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believed it could act as a portal to other dimensions, and that it is guarded by spirits who would potentially harm anyone who tried to go up the volcano. If anyone has any similar experiences or any insight at all, I would love to hear. So please share anything you have to offer. I used to live on a large property with a lake, 29 acres of land, that was heavily forested. I was about 11 or 12 at the time. I was outside by myself right after the sunset. I believe it was the fall. There was barely any light to see outside, except maybe for a light in the house about 50 feet away from the playset and swings that I was on. Behind the playset were really tall trees. There weren't many sapling trees anywhere near because we had been clearing them out. I know specifically that there were no trees short enough to have some sort of owl or other animal sit in because all the trees were mature and taller than my two-story house. My mum came out to tell me that dinner was almost ready. When she did this, she turned on the outside light on the back porch, illuminating the area so I could see a bit better. I was sitting on the swing set at the time. I started to get up and turn around, I think to find my flip-flops, and I see two bright eyes reflecting the light of the outside light, looking at me from about 20 feet away. The eyes were well above any human size, and they were large. They were about 7.5 feet off the ground. I stopped, stunned and really scared. I was really familiar with the woods right behind the swing set, and I knew something unnatural was looking at me. I couldn't see the body, all I saw were the eyes. The eyes looked at me, and I tried to get an understanding, and I thought of something massive and humanoid. Bigfoot. Remember, no animal could have levitated in that spot for longer than 5 or so seconds. Even then, there were no perches or anything there to make me suspect critters. So, to end my experience, I ran inside, locked all the doors, and couldn't think straight for the next couple of days. Let's just say that I never played outside on that swing set after sunset ever again. I think about this still, and it just chills me. So, I'm an avid caver from West Virginia, and there's this cave not far that's been one of my favourites to explore. It's often my go-to cave to take friends and newcomers to get them into caving, as it's easily accessible and not too challenging, although it is a rather large cave system. The first thing to note is there's never any wildlife seen in or near the cave, and I've only ever seen very few bats for as large of a cave as it is. Anyway, the first really strange thing to happen was me and my friends stumbling upon a pentagram made of salt with a dead bird in the middle, circled by some what seemed to be freshly burnt out candles. Obviously it was a bit freaky, but we took it to be a prank by some teens or something along these lines. I've always been very comfortable going through this cave and leading treks, but up until now I had always been with a group of friends. One day I decided to take my girlfriend through, so just me and her went. We didn't make it past the first chamber because I just had an uneasy feeling. I felt as if I just needed to get out of there. My way of describing it is the feeling of being watched, but on steroids. I've been in some sketch places, but I've never had that sense of dread in all my life. The next thing to happen is when a group of us friends went and stumbled upon a newer looking jacket far back in the cave that was never there before. I wouldn't have taken it to be so odd, but it seemed to be a rather expensive jacket with no apparent damage or reason to just leave it lying randomly in this far back portion of the cave. There was also nobody else around at this time. The next thing to happen was when a group of us friends were exploring, and on the way back one of my most serious friends just seemed really strange and off. Finally, I asked him if he was good, and he nodded and quickly told me to just keep moving. Once we got out of the cave, he pulled me in private, which is really not like him, but he told me that he didn't think it was a good idea to go back in there. I finally convinced him to tell me why, and he told me he swore he saw a person back there. From what he could see, a very pale, lanky person. He couldn't quite make it out at first, but he said he noticed it following us. He even tried calling out a few times, but we didn't think anything of him doing it at the time, as it's fun to yell and make echoes in a cave. Anyway, after this experience, I convinced the same friend to go back with me, along with our buddy, to reach an extremely difficult place that I hadn't been able to get to yet, seeing as I've been taking newbies lately. As we arrived at the cave, there was a man and woman camping nearby who were standing at the entrance. We made friendly conversation and asked if they were going to go inside. They said no, they were just checking it out, so we continued on. After reaching our goal and being at the dead end of a very tight spot, we laid and rested for a while. Then we heard people. We all heard it at the same time. As we looked at each other and squinted, we couldn't quite make out what they were saying. It was very distant and echoed and muffled, but we could clearly make out that it was English, male and female voices, and we heard laughter and water splashing. We thought it was pretty odd because it was in the morning and we didn't expect anyone else to be around except those two campers, so we figured it was them. Anyway, as we were exhausted, we rested for a good while longer and shut our lights off to save our batteries. We remained quiet as we were just resting, and after a while we couldn't hear it anymore. We went ahead and made our way back out of the cave, and as we exited, the man and woman were still there by the entrance. My friend asked, "So, you decided to go in after all?" And the man replied, "No, why?" We just asked if anyone else had gone in or out while we had been in there, and they replied they hadn't seen anybody the entire time. At this point, we were creeped out because we all clearly heard voices, but we didn't really talk about it much amongst ourselves. Much later, while doing a bit of research, I started putting things together in my head and realised that my friend's description had been very Wendigo-esque. And then I recalled how Wendigo are known for being able to imitate human voices to lure their prey, and it just really creeped me out. I almost wouldn't believe what he said he saw, but if you understood the person I'm talking about, he's not someone to ever just make up something like that. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. I'd love to hear some opinions or thoughts on what this might have been. Also, I'm not really sure where the witchcraft would tie in, but it's probably worth mentioning that I later talked to another caver friend of mine who, before I could even mention it, told me that they had found a pentagram similar to the one I found in the same exact cave at a different time. It's also worth mentioning there was a dream catcher looking thing near the pentagram, but I don't know if that has any significance. Thank you for listening, my little horrorlings. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe and hit the notification bell to get news about new content and scare away any demons lurking in the shadows. Whatever you do, don't forget to check beneath your bed for monsters. Sweet dreams.